This video is brought to you by the Library of Alexandria because the fear of missing out is real. Hi everybody, my name is Michael Knipp, and today I'm going to talk about a book I didn't think I had any interest in reading. Because I spent such a long time in my life not reading any books, there's a lot of books that I'd never heard of. That includes like all of the Cosmere until I binged it myself. But even major booktube darlings and trends are things that completely passed me by. So when watching booktube before I actually joined myself, I had heard of the series Red Rising. The only thing that people had said about it that I'd seen was that it was like a sci-fi Hunger Games knockoff. That's all I had really heard about it, which doesn't excite me that much because I mentioned in a previous video I did not love the Hunger Games series. So I really just chalked this up to like an older popular YA series of books that probably wasn't for me, and that was okay. And honestly, when Murphy Napier read Red Rising again for her like second time and she really wasn't hot on it, she had a lot of criticisms against it, it sort of sealed the deal for me. I was not interested in Red Rising. The problem was that Alan over on the Library of Alexandria was talking about Red Rising because he was running a read-along for the series. And because Alan is like the gravitational force that pulls all people in the booktube community in, a lot of my friends were interested or partaking in that event. It was during this time that I found out that more of my booktube friends and people in my Discord actually were huge fans of Red Rising, while at the same time I was seeing even more criticism against it in other Discords that I was a part of. And then when my friend Christy Lewis picked it up and she binged it because she loved it, I had to know. Like, this was the level of divisiveness with both people that were super excited for it and people that were super negative on it that I just really had to know for myself. It was like sort of similar to my reading Addie LaRue. So I didn't know when it was going to fit into my schedule, but I threw the book and the audiobook on my library hold just in case it would show up, and then coincidentally, it showed up right when I was in the middle of reading some other things. I put it off a little bit longer. It just so happens I had an hour drive the other day. I thought, hey, I finished that Star Wars book I was reading. Let's try Red Rising. And that was one of the smartest decisions I feel like I could have made because I loved this book. And because I've been lurking in Alan's Discord, I have seen so many different points and critiques and things mentioned about the story that I thought it would be fun to address all of the thoughts that I sort of have had and all of the responses that I've had to this discussion in a video. I'm going to be keeping this spoiler free, so feel free to stick around if you've never read the series, but I'm going to go ahead and just address some of the things that I've heard about this book as well as share my thoughts on how I feel about those opinions. Firstly, there is the information that I had going into this, which is that it was a Hunger Games knockoff. I sort of see the comparison, like we have a dystopian setting. There is an event where people are participating in a battle royale type endeavor, but the circumstances surrounding everything short of like a dystopian setting, a classist setting, the setting of a class system, relatively young children fighting each other violently, like these are the comparisons that I've made, but that sort of pretends that the Hunger Games is the first thing that ever introduced the battle royal or dystopian settings in general. The plot beats really aren't the same between these two series, though some of the potential like heavy hitting moments are similar because you have young children in violent battles. The worlds really aren't comparable. The character types, like the main characters, are not comparable. And frankly, as someone that wasn't a fan of the Hunger Games, I loved this book like way more, in part because I feel like the world makes a lot more sense to me, at least from what we've seen so far. I had a hard time when I was reading the Hunger Games understanding how the world would get to the point where the Hunger Games existed without causing a revolt before what happens in that series. In this series, I think there's a lot more layers in how the world could get to the point where it is, and I think it's actually more devious in the ways that the dystopian setting is like both set up and executed on multiple levels. The main characters in these series are very different, whereas Katniss is much more introspective and brooding. Darrow in this series is quite confident in his abilities. He's a very talented individual, which leads to some people criticizing this book for him being maybe a little bit of a Gary Stu when it comes to things. And I think that is a fair criticism. It didn't necessarily bother me the way that it was presented in the book, but it becomes obvious very early on that this character is very confident in his abilities and he's very good at a lot of things. I think that in Red Rising, the themes are much more hard-hitting and prevalent than I ever really felt they were in the Hunger Games. And while the Hunger Games had certain things where it pushed back against societal ideas and made you think about things, I think Red Rising does that way more. Now let's talk about some of the other presentation things that may turn you off but didn't bother me. One is that the book is written in first first person present tense, I think, which a lot of people don't like first person. A lot of people don't like present tense. For me, I think that it was actually executed really well in this book. The other thing that sort of goes hand in hand with that bothers some people is that the writing, the prose itself is very deliberate with its pacing. It's very staccato and short and large portions of the book. But I think that fits the story that is being told and sort of the tone that is being evoked with this like very deliberate pacing, short sentences over and over. I think it allows the author to switch between the main character's thoughts on a situation and what's happening in a very interesting and fluid way that really did click for me. And that's why I think that the beginning of this book, which can be a struggle for some, was not a struggle for me. I was able to identify with the situation, the plot of the main character, because like every sort of dystopian setting, there is an established routine in the world, and then something comes up and shakes that all up, and that's sort of what gets the plot going. When I was looking at discussions in Alan's Discord, that specific piece of the puzzle, like some people thought it was too rushed, some people thought it was too slow, some people thought it was too tell, not enough show, but for me, it was sort of the right amount of time to get across the point that we needed to get across for the story that we were then going to progress into. The emotional beats that were supposed to hit hard for me, and I really have no criticisms with that first section at all. So like I said, the world for me is really cool. The prose for me is really cool. I did not mind the main character and many of the side characters really either. I was very invested in the story. There are moments that are so brutal and so effective at what they do that it really made me queasy or like uneasy, which then could bring up one of the debatable aspects of this series that I don't think necessarily actually matters that much, but is this a YA or an adult series? And I lean heavily in that it is a YA series. It includes YA tropes for the most part. It handles them very well. But I do think that it includes YA tropes. There's nothing wrong with YA tropes. I loved this book, but I think some people push back against this book being considered YA because of the negative stigmas that are attached to that classification. As with many YA series, there's a lot of brutal things that happen in this book. There's a lot of things that are implied or described to varying levels of explicitness that could add trigger warnings that people may lead it to think that it's more adult than it is, but it's handled in a way that is very PG-13. And that mixed with the sort of tropes that it employs, I really think that this is just a really well done YA book that includes elements that people that like adult books may also like. In my opinion, the tropes are not pushed to the extreme so hard that people that prefer adult fiction will not be able to enjoy this. Now that I've been involved in this, I've sort of recognized that there are more adults that enjoy this series than perhaps some other YA series. So yeah, there's going to be some complicated themes. There's going to be a lot of violence. There's going to be some like complex moral issues. All fun things to speculate about in our speculative fiction. So what that boils down to for me is that Red Rising is a really, really good book with some flaws that I'll go into in just a second. The prose is competent at telling the story that is supposed to be told. The characters and plot are very interesting and very bingeable. That's how I partook of the book. I read it in like 3 days. The philosophical themes at play, can be a little obvious at times, but nevertheless are really well done in my opinion. I think the book both ends in a satisfying way and also sets up the next book, the rest of the series, in a really good way as well. You know where the story is going, but the conclusion of book 1 is a really good spot to end it. For the most part, I don't think tropes controlled any major element of the plot to the point where it became cheesy or corny, except for one instance. And in order for me to talk about that one instance, I will talk about maybe my major criticism with this book, which should not hamper it enough to lower my 5-star rating, but the thing that I think that this book maybe doesn't always handle the best is its actual action scenes. The way that they are described sometimes works really well. Sometimes you're looking at it from more of a high level situation, but there are a couple instances towards the end of the book where I felt like it was very contrived, and certain things happened because the author wanted them to happen, but he did not use the action or the scenes of the book to justify what he was trying to pull off. And what that resulted in was a major emotional moment that instead of me being invested in the way that I should have been, I was more just frustrated with how mishandled that element of the plot was. The action felt like it was controlled by the trope instead of the action sucking me into the immersion of the story. So during the climax, there is a lot of really cool combat moments that happen, but they don't have the emotional or sort of visceral punch that you would hope that they would have in the major climax of a book. And I recognize that maybe I am a little bit spoiled because I really enjoy Brandon Sanderson, and he is known for having some of the best, Sanderlanches climaxes in his books. But I really do think that this one fell flat a little bit. Not the climax itself, not the plot itself, but the way that it was executed in the story. Since we're speaking about things that were a little bit clunky, I will bring up that Murphy Napier had a criticism against this book that it seems like the author, maybe in some of his naivety or his lack of skill, or maybe even potentially just a lack of creativity, there is a certain thing that this author uses in nearly 100% of the instances where he wants to have a character that you maybe were on the fence about shown to be actually a bad guy. Like, the author goes back to the same well over and over and over in a way that is a little bit insensitive and also extremely repetitive, to the point where by the end of the story, it's not only predictable, it's a little bit laughable in a sad way. I don't think that the author's repeated use of this same thing over and over was something that necessarily breaks the context of the world or the immersion of the world, because I don't think that it actually breaks the tone, but it is a little obnoxious. But regardless, my enjoyment for this first installment in the series was so high that when I found out that universally everyone seems to think that Golden Sun, the next book in the series, is even better, it kind of blew my mind and made me extremely excited to read the next book, because I'm really high coming off this one. The majority of the problems that people have against it did not bother me, and I think that a lot of the discussion that I've seen about this book previous to reading it myself was disingenuous on the level where it always was just a Hunger Games comparison. And I don't think that's fair. I think there's way more interesting things happening in this book than just giving it that comparison, and I recognize that that probably also stems from me not enjoying the Hunger Games. But honestly, I think it's an unfair comparison because I could easily see people who enjoyed one not enjoying the other, and vice versa. In Alan's Discord, another common comparison for this book that I think makes more sense than the Hunger Games is potentially Rage of Dragons, though I think in some ways that book handles certain elements better and this book handles certain elements way better. Nevertheless, I still stand by the fact that I think this book really holds its own and it doesn't feel derivative. But now that you've heard my thoughts, I'm curious what you guys think. Is this a series that you've read before? Am I the last person to be reading Red Rising? It's a series that's been around and been popular on BookTube for some time. So if you have read Red Rising, please leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your favorite characters. How strong were you feeling about the series based on book one alone? How much did you know about the series before watching this video? Was I maybe able to pique your curiosity one way or the other? As I said, even among my own friend group, I think that this book is fairly divisive. So I would love to hear any thoughts from people who really didn't like this book in the comments down below as well. I'm so grateful that I was sucked into this read along. Thank you, Alan, for hosting. Thank you everyone for having great discussion about this book in his server over there. For anyone who may be interested, I'm going to link Alan's channel down below. This month was slated for reading Red Rising, and next month was slated for reading Golden Sun, and continuing along with one book a month. So you still have time to read Red Rising this month, or if you want to use next month, you could catch up, because I really do think this is a quick read. I don't think it would be hard to catch up and read Red Rising and Golden Sun next month if you're really interested. And obviously, if you can't tell from my thoughts about it, I would highly suggest that you do read that if this sounds interesting to you. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this discussion, please leave a thumbs up on the video. If you'd like to see more discussions from me about the Red Rising series or about any other book, please hit the subscribe button down below, and if you hit the bell, you'll get notified anytime I post a new video. Once again, if you have any thoughts about this series, please let me know in the comments down below, or if you'd like to talk about it more in depth, I have a link down below to my Discord, which is free to join. I love to chat with people over there. If you'd like to support the channel financially as well as get access to some members only sort of things, there's a link down below to a Patreon, as well as a link to a merch store where you could buy some dumb shirts that I've created. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are safe and you are happy. I can't wait to see you again, and until next time, goodbye.
Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If it don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.